Hey, Cookies here. Let's talk about Upper Karazhan and how to heal it. So, starting off, just like Lower Kara, we're going to have the Forlorn Spirits. These do the exact same thing as Lower Kara. They're going to cast Shadow Rend, which needs to be dispelled on the tank immediately. And then they're also going to do a Soul Leech cast, which just needs to be interrupted. Otherwise, the whole group takes a heavy amount of damage. So, just be aware, just in case the cast is going through, you can kind of be prepared for what damage went out to your entire group. And then next up, we're going to go ahead and skip quite a bit ahead to these damaged golems. I don't remember if we pulled them or not. It looks like we skipped them. So the damaged golems, all they'll do is spit a bunch of swirlies all over the floor. It's called unstable energy. I would just recommend never hesitate to use damage reduction or even healing cooldowns during this part because it's really hard to avoid all the swirlies that spawn in this room, even if you only pull one damaged golem. So people are probably going to take damage, and it is not very kind in how much damage it deals to you. So don't hesitate and just be prepared for people to get hit by a lot of stuff if you're fighting the damaged golems. The abstract nullifier here, that's the next mob. And this guy is just going to cast nullification. That's the only thing that's really important. If it goes on you, it will silence you and spawn this little like purple kind of zone on the floor. It's kind of hard to see, but just look for all the purple orbs and stuff on the floor, and you just need to walk into it to unsilence yourself. And then next up, we have these mana confluences. So these guys will cast Arcane Barrage, and it will just do damage to everybody in the group that's around them. So you'll just see the group taking a moderate amount of damage as they gain mana and then cast that ability. Usually I only see them cast it like once, and then they never regen their mana, really. But I could be incorrect about that. But otherwise, just watch their damage on the tanks. They just auto-attack after they're out of mana. And then next up, we have the actual boss itself. So we'll go ahead and skip ahead a bit. So the Curator will cast Volatile Energy, which summons these little ads. They're called Volatile Energy. And they will just jump around the room and do random bits of damage to people. And they'll also just do damage based on how many volatile energies are out. So they'll just kind of zap people as they're alive. You don't necessarily want to focus them. You usually want to cleave off the boss onto them. But if they start getting out of control, like if you have 2 or 3 volatile energies alive, you really want to swap targets and kill the volatile energies. They also spawn like these false swirlies on the floor. I haven't fully tested it, so these swirlies are different. Those swirlies that you just saw, when everybody gets a swirly under their feet, that is power discharge, and that is a thing that you need to immediately get out of, otherwise you die, like you saw me. It has a much bigger hitbox than what it appears, so make sure you actually clear some distance when you are dodging those swirlies. But when the volatile energies spawn like a singular swirly on the floor, like right... where is it going to be? Right about there. When it's just one swirly on the floor, to my knowledge, it doesn't do anything if you stand in it. I could be wrong, but it's where the volatile energy is jumping to. It might do a slight amount of damage, or maybe I'm just doing keys that are too low to notice it, and you do still want to avoid it, but you don't have to panic as much with these singular swirlies. And then the last thing that the boss will cast is Evocation. So Evocation is when the boss runs out of mana, the boss will take double damage and pretty much stand still for like 20 seconds. So that's where you want to pop Lust and pop damage cooldowns, or if you're a healer, you want to really like pump damage into the boss and just help do as much damage as you possibly can during that Evocation. So here you can see the Evocate. If there's volatile energies alive, you want to make sure that those get finished off, ideally before the Evocation. And that is pretty much it for the boss. It just repeats from there. And these pools never go away, so you really want to be mindful of how much space you're taking up, and usually stack with other people of the same, like role type as you. So like range DPS and healers should be stacking up. Melee DPS and melee healers should be stacking up with the tank, stuff like that. That way you're moving kind of as a group and only dropping like a line of puddles at a time and kind of working in rows, if that makes sense. All right, next up we have the Infused Pyromancer, which we are going to skip here, but I will just mention what he does real quick. So the Infused Pyromancers, they will spawn Fel Bombs on the floor. They're just these little, like, it's like a giant green puddle on the floor with an orb inside of it. You just want to make sure that you stand in it and soak the orb that spawns. You just basically, all you do in order to soak it is stand in it until the orb goes away and the pool on the floor goes away. And then we have this Wrathguard Flamebringer. This guy will jump to random players and cleave them, so make sure you're not in front of him. And then also when he jumps to you, make sure you move out of the way immediately. And then we have the boss. So this is Shade of Medivh. This is probably one of the most healing intensive bosses in the patch currently. So it's definitely important to understand what's going on in this fight. So I will go ahead and explain that here. So a lot of casts are so all of his casts are interruptible, but it's more about what you are interrupting. So this is going to be something that's mostly out of your control as a healer, unless you're with a pre-made group. But ideally, you don't interrupt piercing missiles, and then you only okay, so let's talk about, I guess the easiest way to break it down, let me think about this, is the most important thing that you have to interrupt is Frostbite. So Frostbite has to be interrupted every single time. There's like no exceptions. You don't want to let it go through. If it does go through, it freezes one of the players, and then you have to use these Inferno Bolts. You have to let the Inferno Bolt cast, and then the player that has the Inferno Bolt on them with this like red circle around them, they need to stand on top of the player who has Frostbite because they are frozen, so you use the fire to break them out. The frozen thing. Yeah, cool. So next up is Inferno Bolt. You want to be interrupting this as much as you can, unless someone is affected by Frostbite, or if you won't have an interrupt available for the next upcoming Frostbite, then you want to save your interrupt instead of interrupting this. If the cast is going off, you can use things like Night Fae Blink, or Holy Paladins can run really fast with their Crusader stuff, when they mount up in combat, like that kind of stuff. You can use that, and if you're in motion fast enough, you can dodge the Inferno Bolt, because it summons the Inferno Bolt on you, and then once the cast finishes, it has a travel time before it actually blows up, but it always blows up in the spot that you were at when the cast finishes. So if you are able to get far enough away, you can actually avoid the damage completely. So that's something to be mindful of. If you see the cast is going to go off on you, try to be in motion when it finishes so that you do not get hit by it. So there's the Frostbite if it does go off. So now we have to use an Inferno Bolt in order. So here I get Inferno Bolt. It looks like we accidentally interrupted it. We want to wait until we have an Inferno Bolt that doesn't get interrupted, and then we would put it on the Warlock. So this Inferno Bolt goes on the Warlock, and there we go, we break them out. All right, and then the next important thing, so we have the Bigwigs timers here. You can see focused power on the Bigwigs timer. This is one of 3 phases. It picks randomly. You don't have a choice of which ones you get. It's just going to be one of 3 phases. So it's going to be an Arcane, a Fire, or a Frost phase. So the one that we get, I don't remember which one we end up getting, so I guess we'll see. Oh, and also whenever Inferno Bolt does go off on people, they will get a 4-second debuff. Make sure you heal them. This is a very heavy hitting debuff. So here we get the Frost phase, which is Ceaseless Winter. This is the easiest phase by far. All you have to do is make sure that you're just moving constantly. So just move in between casts, jump up and down, move left to right, strafe back and forth. It doesn't matter. But as long as you stay at 1 stack, as soon as you hit 2 stacks, you can see there, like I start taking immediate damage. The Warlock's taking damage because he's casting stuff. So if you like stop to cast something, you will take a bit of damage, so be aware of that. But as long as you just keep moving, you take 0 damage. So here I have an Inferno Bolt, so we're healing that up. And then we're just going to skip ahead to the next focused power. So here it is right here. This is probably the most dangerous one. This is the Flame Wreath, which is the fire phase. So when you have the Flame Wreaths, you are going to see that 2 players get targeted by a debuff. It's a 20-second debuff. So here it's on myself and the Warlock. We're going to get these rings that spawned around us of fire. You cannot step out of this ring. If you touch the ring of fire, you wipe the entire group. It just kills everybody instantly. You have to stay inside of the ring. And then also, these 2 players are going to take an immense amount of damage over the next 20 seconds. So you can see I'm precasting Divine Hymn. What I would basically do is I would assign your cooldowns. Like, think about how you're going to use your cooldowns. You want at least 1 or 2 cooldowns for the Flame Wreath phase, typically things that are going to be more beneficial to healing like 1 or 2 players. So more like single target focused stuff or damage reduction things. That's what's going to be the most beneficial during the fire phase. And then that we're going to talk about in a second, but the Arcane phase, you're going to want another healing cooldown, and it's going to need to be more AoE focused, because every single player in the group is going to be taking more like a decent amount of damage. So fire phase, 1 or 2 players taking a ton of damage. Arcane phase, everybody taking a moderate amount of damage. So here, the goal is literally just to live. And if this Infernal Bolt goes off, which it does, if you see this overlap, this is like, you are in a lot of trouble. So this is Desperate Prayer. I'm probably GAing myself, and I'm spam healing myself super hard because it's doing like half of my health and damage every 2 seconds. So if you ever get that overlap, that's what you want to be extremely careful of. And then like here, it's really important that all the Inferno Bolts get interrupted during this. But again, it's out of your control if you're pugging like this. So you really need to just make sure that you're ready to deal with it. And that's why we stay ahead and proactive by planning healing cooldowns for that phase. All right, sorry, that was long-winded. And then lastly, we have the Arcane phase, which is Guardian's Image. This will spawn 3 birds around the room. You can see we have 1 marked. That's the one that we're going to kill first. And the 3 birds will just spam cast Arcane Bolt. It does a decent amount. It does like a moderate amount of damage to whoever it's targeting. So you want to interrupt. First of all, you want to interrupt these as much as possible. And then second, you want to be healing a lot. So again, plan a healing cooldown because these Arcane Bolts will absolutely hurt. So keep everybody topped up because not only do the Arcane Bolts do damage, but the birds also just pulse for AoE damage while they're alive. So there's single target damage happening from the Arcane Bolts, and then there's also just unavoidable group-wide damage happening constantly. So this is where you want to plan some kind of healing cooldown as well, which you can see I use Apotheosis for this. And that's the whole fight. If you can make it through that, then you're all good. If the fight does last long enough, you do get 2 phases of each of these. So the boss will just keep rotating through phases. And once he does all 3, so he can't do the same one twice in a row, and he has to go through all 3 phases before going through one of the ones he's already done. So you have to go through Fire, Frost, and Arcane before you get those again. So if you get Fire first as like your first phase, you cannot get Fire again until you also deal with Frost and Arcane. So that's it. Full fight. All right, what are we talking about next? Let's see. We got the Mana Devourer. We're just skipping ahead to the boss. Trash doesn't really matter here. Nothing to worry about. So Mana Devourer, Energy Discharge is the first ability the boss does. It's not really on a timer at the moment for bigwigs as far as I'm aware. It just does a random zap of moderate damage to everybody in the group. So be mindful. Keep everybody topped up for that. And then so there's the energy discharge right there. It does a lot of damage. And then we're going to have the Coalesce Power, which is where the boss will spawn all these little orbs around the room. You can see him start dropping orbs like on the edges of the room, and the orbs will get pulled towards the boss. You want to intercept these and block them from touching the boss. You'll get a stacking debuff for each orb that you soak. And then as soon as you soak these orbs, you want to stand in this purple stuff on the floor, and it will remove your stacks. It removes them one at a time, and you do take damage while you're in the pool. So just be aware that it's not going to just immediately remove your stacks. So that's why you don't want to soak too many of the orbs. I would say like 3 at most, or 4 if you have a big damage reduction cooldown. But typically it's grab 2 or 3 orbs, remove your stacks immediately. Don't hold on to them. A lot of people will try to hold on to them like this in pugs and stuff, and that's just going to be something you have to deal with as a healer, is healing the players who won't get rid of their stacks because it does increase their damage, but the trade-off just isn't really worth it for how much damage you're taking with those stacks and with other abilities like this overlapping. So take 2 or 3 orbs and then immediately remove them. You can also use things like immunities, so if you're a paladin, you can just bubble or go soak a bunch of orbs and then bubble, and it gets rid of your stacks all immediately, and you don't have to stand in the purple stuff. So that's also beneficial to utilize. And that is pretty much it for that fight. We'll go ahead and skip ahead again. And now we fight Mana Devourers, but they're ads this time instead of a boss. And these guys do something very similar. They will just, while you're fighting them, they'll just spawn all these orbs around the edge of the room. The orbs get pulled towards them. If it touches them, it does a moderate amount of AoE damage to everybody, or I guess I should say a minor amount of AoE damage. It's just when multiple orbs are hitting. That's when it starts doing a lot. And then alternatively, you can also soak the orbs, which does the same thing. It does a little bit of damage to you and everybody nearby, but it also gives you a nice damage buff that isn't associated with a dot. So you can take this damage buff and be happy with it. So soak the orbs before they touch the mana worms, and then just heal the AoE damage that's happening. So probably use another healing cooldown here if something's up by the time you get to this. And then next up we have the chess event. We're just going to skip ahead. This is Super messy because we're skipping through this stuff. So the chess event, not really too much you need to be aware of as a healer. It's just help DPS the knights. You should always kill the knights first, and then when the knights die, the king becomes vulnerable to damage, and you can do DPS to the king. There, I got stuck on a stupid invisible wall or something. It's a mess in this room, so just be really careful because you do die in one shot if you make any kind of mistake on the chess pieces. But it's just kill knights and then kill the king while he's vulnerable. If you are a melee healer, try to track the king's vulnerability window. It's 20 seconds for each piece that you kill, and it does stack. So if you kill like 2 knights at the same time, it'll be 40 seconds of vulnerability. If you just kill 1 knight, it'll be 20 seconds, because right as the vulnerability ends, he does a big AoE sweep, and you do not have time to get out of it, and it will just one-shot you. So as a melee healer, you want to be very careful of when his vulnerability is ending. All right, and then we talk about the last boss. So here we have Vizidum the Watcher. The first thing that the boss is going to do is cast Fell Beam, which just targets a random player. You just want to run away. It will just spawn a beam on top of your location and then chase you with these pools on the floor. So right here you can see the Fell Beam on our tank. So the tank literally just has to kind of run around in a circle around the boss and kite this beam all over the place and leave these puddles on the floor. And then the boss will cast Chaotic Shadows. This is probably the most important thing as a healer to be aware of in this fight. So it will debuff a random player. There's 3 phases to this fight, which is just each platform that you fight on. So there's the first phase, which is this platform, second phase, which is the next, third phase, which is the last. And each phase tells you how many Chaotic Shadows you have to deal with at a time. So in phase 1, it's just 1 Chaotic Shadows. So when you see Chaotic Shadows happen, we'll only have 1 stack of it. I don't know if we end up dealing with it. We might skip it here, but we'll see. Let us see. Okay, I do end up getting it here. So here I have the Chaotic Shadows. It'll deal a pretty heavy amount of damage to the player while they have the debuff. And then once you dispel it, it's going to send all these orbs flying out from the player. And these orbs will pretty much one-shot people if they come in contact with them. So you want to be very careful of where you're positioning. Like I was positioned in a really bad spot, cornering myself by all the green stuff. You want to give yourself a nice open space to stand in. And then also, don't dispel instantly ever with that debuff on anybody. If someone has it, the best rule is to keep them topped up, count to 3, and then dispel. So I just do like in my head, I'm just like 1, 2, 3, okay, I'm dispelling somebody. And same thing in phase 2 and phase 3. You're just picking, usually you prioritize like melee players because they're going to be the ones who want to run out and run back in. And range players can kind of just stay out with their debuff, but melee players, they have to run out to drop off their debuff. Because obviously you don't want the debuff expiring or getting dispelled while they're near other players, because then all the orbs just instantly hit them. So count to 3, then dispel somebody. And then whoever you can't dispel in these other phases, when you have multiple debuffs, you just keep that player topped up that you didn't dispel. So here you'll see that we get multiple Chaotic Shadows. So there's 2 Chaotic Shadows. I'm counting to 3. 1, 2, 3. We dispel the Hunter. Probably should have dispelled the Rogue, but it's okay. I was figuring that they could probably cloak it, and it didn't end up happening, so mistake on my part. And then that's pretty much it. And then we have phase 3, so we go to phase 3, which is this last platform, and this platform has ads. Dispel the tank as much as possible before Chaotic Shadows happens. So Chaotic Shadows happens pretty early on, so make sure you dispel the tank pretty early, and then also use some kind of damage reduction cooldown or external, because these Felguard sentries apply a stacking dot on the tank, and it hurts really bad. So, like here, I can't dispel because I'm worried that we're going to get the Chaotic Shadows really soon, so there's the Chaotic Shadows. I'm counting to 3. There, the tank died instantly to all the stacks and stuff, I think. So his Chaotic Shadows just blow up immediately. And then we're dispelling somebody else. We're giving them time to run out. There we dispel the Warlock. Now the Rogue cloaks. And then we get to finish the boss. And that is pretty much the whole fight. If you take too long, you'll get another set of Chaotic Shadows, which is really dangerous. I think you're basically just trying to beat this second Chaotic Shadows before it spawns. And that is the whole fight. So be mindful of Chaotic Shadows, count to 3 before you dispel, and stay spread out from other players. Chaotic Shadows is the one thing that will wipe you like 100% of the time, so it's something to be very mindful of. All right, and that is it for Upper Karazhan. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys later.